Yeah. So, for Japan and Korea, there are many sources of tension and conflict, but they are also both wealthy and peaceful democracies, and they have a lot of goals in common. What do you think the ideal relationship between Japan and Korea would look like?
First of all, Korea and Japan have now, as economically developed and socially mature nations, are now faced with common problems, such as, for instance, environment, such as, for instance, low birth rate, demographic problems, immigration. So, first of all, we have to enumerate, list up those common problems which the two countries are now faced with, and try to tackle them together. In other words, how they have to explore the avenues along which they are able to discuss, debate, and deal with together the common problems which the two nations are now faced with.
Prime Minister Abe has been called a historical revisionist.
By Western press, I guess.
By a lot of Western press, definitely, and I imagine by some Korean press as well.
I suppose so.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there is a perception this is a problem, and efforts to change the pacifist constitution. There's an idea that there's historical revisionism. Do you think this is going to be a problem for Japanese-Korean relations in the next couple of years?
Frankly speaking, yes, that is a rather moot point. In other words, that is a rather difficult problem to deal with. In other words, there is a gap perceptions of Korea and relations with Korea among Japanese general public, and Japanese strategists, Japanese politicians, Japanese political leaders. I think in the view of Japanese political leaders, they look at Korea from the standpoint of the nations which belong to the so-called Western camp, and also the economically developed nations group, and also belong to the so-called American camp in terms of security in confrontation with North Korea. From the standpoint of political leaders, Korea is viewed as a partner, natural partner in many senses.
Yeah, and the Americans certainly think so too.
The Americans do, yes. But in the eyes of general public, Korea has growingly become a rival to Japan, economic competitor and rival. Also, in the minds of Japanese, there is a kind of sentiment that Korea does not objectively view Japan, but their view, in the eyes of Japanese, Korea views Japan somewhat with the colored spectacles of historical past. So there's a feeling that Japan is not objectively judged, objectively viewed by many Koreans. So there's a backlash of this sentiment on the minds of Japanese that no, we don't like Koreans because not particularly we don't like Koreans, but they don't like us. See? This type of sentiment is getting spread.
Do you think that
because until about recently there was some sort of tolerance, because Korea was still a poor nation which had difficulties in confronting with North Korea. Therefore, you see, there was some sort of a sense of tolerance on the part of the Japanese sentiment. But now, Korea is growingly viewed, as I have just said. It's kind of rival and competitor in many senses. Therefore, There is no. In other words, they regard many Japanese view Korea as a kind of an equal. I mean, just a neighbor, not a poor nation, not a nation for which Japan has to help.
Yeah, it's. I mean, do you think this is why Prime Minister Abe's attitude is popular?
Therefore, because of this widespread sentiment of the Japanese vis-à-vis Koreans or Korea, politicians in Japanese context have to take into consideration this national sentiment. Therefore, at the time of the election, you see, or in the political debates addressed to the mass, they have to, you see, declare themselves to be a sort of a tough guy against Korea or China. But when they are in the position to form national strategies, they put more emphasis on the strategic values of those nations.
Yeah, it's like how American politicians deal with China. They have a very similar attitude.
American politicians have this, exactly, yes. They criticize China during the election campaign.
I guess the interesting question is whether Japanese resentment of Korea is made worse by politicians making this argument in public over and over again.
Yes, I think that is a rather unfortunate thing. I think the roles of politicians sometimes, of course, statesmen and politicians have to follow to a certain extent national sentiment. They have to take into consideration national sentiment, obviously, but they have to recreate, they have to adjust, they have to even correct national sentiment sometimes, national emotion. And the roles of politicians sometimes have to lead the mass rather than to follow the mass.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.